Hey guys, welcome to the video, Salt here. Today we're going to be going over the melee weapon, the Zenistar. But before we do, let's go over our commenter board. Our first commenter and top commenter of the last video was the Gergen Schlurgen. And then we have our recent channel supporters here of Whiptywham, Nice Bear, and Colonel06. Thank you so much for your support. The Zenistar is a login reward weapon. You'll first be able to pick it at day 100 along with the Azima secondary or the Zenith primary. Whatever you don't pick, you'll be able to pick again at day 300 and then finally day 500 for that last one. Because you have to wait hundreds of days in between these weapons, I just want to briefly go over all three. That way you can make the most educated decision when you finally encounter these. So the Zenistar, the one we're going to be going over today, it is a bit of a niche. It is a best in slot, or I should say tied for best in slot, for Pseudo-Exalt Warframes who use Wrathful Advance. That is only a few Warframes in the game. The ones I'm familiar with are Gara and Atlas. I'm sure there's a few others there, but that's its niche, is that it is tied for best in slot for those Warframes. The Zenith, which is another one that is very niche, this is the primary assault rifle, and this is very good at doing profit taker content. And then finally, the Azima, which is the secondary, actually probably has the most general usage. It has a build where you can have it basically just passively generate overguard. It's very useful for pretty much any Warframe. And so I always recommend picking up the Azima first, unless you really love doing profit taker content. And in that case, you might want to pick up the Zenith, or if you're like an Atlas or a Gara main or another Warframe that uses Pseudo-Exalt, then the Zenistar might be your first pick. Unique and interesting things about the Zenistar is that it has innate heat on the weapon already. It also has this unique trait here where heavy attacks shoot a floating disc, dealing heat damage in a 4-meter radius. Discs last for 10 seconds, increased by combo multiplier. Now, this also applies modded elements, and that heat will also mix with elements that you have on the weapon. The other thing where it says discs last for 10 seconds and it's increased by combo multiplier actually affects it pretty strongly. So at no combo or 1 times, it's going to last for 10 seconds, but at 2 times, it lasts for like 22 seconds, about 22 seconds. So that's a pretty big increase for only 1 more combo multiplier. And I found that at 6 times combo multiplier, you'll be at its maximum of 70-second duration. I also tested to see if I can get past that 70 seconds, and it doesn't seem so. It seems to be like that is the cap. I tested it at times 12 and it was still only 70 seconds. So 6 times seems to be where you're either about or at that 70-second cap there. I have 3 different builds I want to showcase today. I have a melee duplicate build, and then I have a pure status build that uses melee influence. Now, these 2 builds are going to be the general damaging builds for the Zenistar. They work pretty well. However, I would argue that there are a lot of other melee weapons in the game that are going to do general damage builds way better than the Zenistar is. I think the Zenistar's real bread and butter and where it actually has a best in slot purpose is this stat stick build for Pseudo-Exalt Warframes. So this is the third build is the one I am really going to suggest you really focus on if you want to play the Zenistar to its full potential. So let's go over the first build, or the duplicate build first. And the question you have to ask is, well, why duplicate? And it's because the Zenistar has a base critical chance of 10%. So there's 2 things you can do with a really bad critical chance on a melee weapon. You can either completely forget about it and go with a pure status build, which is what we did in our second build here, or you can try to get it to yellow crits and make use out of melee duplicate, which is what we're doing here on this build. If we read melee duplicate, this says on a base critical hit, that is a yellow. That is not a white, that's not an orange, that's not a red, it's only yellow crits. So on a base critical hit, 100% chance for your attack to strike a second time. For us to get 100% yellow crits, we need to be at 100% critical chance. So for a duplicate build, you want to be as close as humanly possible to 100% critical chance. So let's do some math here. Again, remember we have 10% base critical chance. So that's 10% plus 11 from Galvanized Steel, plus another 11 from Gladiator Might, plus another 11 from Gladiator Vice, and then plus 44 from Blood Rush. So that's going to give us a total of 87% critical chance, which is pretty good. It's not exactly 100%, you know, we're 13% away. So that means 13% of our attacks are not going to make use out of melee duplicate, but 87% will, and that's still pretty decent. So let's go through the mods now for the duplicate build here. Remember, we have innate heat, so we're going to have the 60/60 toxin mod of virulent scourge. I'm sorry, I can't say that. To make gas. I also tested with blast here too. You can, you know, mix heat with cold here instead to make blast. In my kill testing, gas was actually kind of eking out blast a little bit, but you could try blast yourself too. They're both very similar. In the next mod, we have galvanized steel for crit chance, crit damage. Then organ shatter for crit damage. Gladiator might for critical chance, critical damage. Condition overload for flat damage per unique status effect affecting the target. Gladiator vice for 30% attack speed and critical chance. Blood rush for critical chance, and weeping wounds for status chance. In the stance slot, we have rending crane. This is also going to be the one that you start with the polarity for, so it's perfect. In the Tennokai slot, we're using discipline's merit. This is going to enable a Tennokai after every 4 melee hits instead of at random. And of course, in the arcane slot, we have melee duplicate. Now, the kill testing for the duplicate build here, I was doing 5-minute runs on Steel Path Lewis Circulus, and the duplicate builds were getting 422, 423, and 470 kills for an average of 438. And just to say, you know, before we go into the status build here, that is less than what the status build was getting. That is actually 20% less than what the status build was getting. But there is some merits to the duplicate build. Even though it was getting less kill per minute, it was able to deal with larger targets like acolytes much better than the status build. Status build was great at dealing with trash, not so great at dealing with bigger targets. So there is still a little bit of merit to the duplicate build because of that. Now let's go over the second build, which is the status build. This is the build where we saw that critical chance of 10%, and we said, you know what, that is so low, I don't even want to try to work with that. So I'm going to completely forget about critical chance, and I'm going to focus all on status chance and status damage. So let's go over the mods. We have Berserker Fury for 70% attack speed. We have Primed Reach for +3 range. We have Weeping Wounds for 440% status chance. We have Galvanized Elementalist for +80% status damage and 120% status chance. Condition Overload for flat damage per unique status affecting the target. And in the next 3 slots, we're going to be making either Blast and Electric or Gas and Electric. Although personally on the status build, I actually felt like Blast Electric was doing slightly better, but you could always try Gas Electric too. So we have the 60/60 Cold mod and the 60/60 Heat mod to make Blast. And then we have the 60/60 Electric mod for electric, of course. Now, the reason we are going with electric at the very end is because on the pure status build, we're going to be going for an arcane called Melee Influence, and this is on a melee electricity status, 20% chance for elemental melee status effects to apply to enemies within 20 meters for 18 seconds. So it kind of turns you into like a little mobile nuke around the map, really strong. In the stance slot, we're still using Rending Crane, and in the Tennokai slot, we're still using Disciple's Merit here. And when we go over the kill testing for the status build, the kill testing in those 3 5-minute runs on Steel Path Lewis Circulus were 518, 553, and 516 with an average of 529. And that was 20.78% stronger in kill per minute than the duplicate build was. So the status build, much better in kill per minute, but it was kind of lagging behind when I had to deal with acolytes. Definitely not as strong as a duplicate build against those big, thicker enemies. Now let's go over the third build, which is going to be the Pseudo-Exalt stat stick. This is the real bread and butter of the Zenistar, and this is why the Zenistar has a best in slot place in the game for specifically Pseudo-Exalt Warframes that use Wrathful Advance. So that's a little bit of a niche there, but for that niche, it is the best in slot for damage. It's only tied for best in slot with other weapons that have more of a utility focus. For damage, it is the best in slot for those Warframes. So let's go over the mods first, then we'll go over how it actually works, and I'll show how it works as well. So first we have Weeping Wounds here. On this build, because we stay at ×5 combo, it's not 440% status chance, it's actually only 160% status chance. And because of that, there is a consideration to put Corrupt Charge over Weeping Wounds, but before I explain that, I want to go over the second mod. So the second mod we have here is Galvanized Reflex. The important part of this is the bottom part. where on a melee kill, we get plus 20 initial combo for 20 seconds, stacking up to 4 times. This will let us stay at a ×5 combo. It's really good. That ×5 combo is going to make our disc into a 60-second duration, which is great. I feel like 60 is just as good as 70 seconds. It's fine, but it is a conditional. You have to get the melee kills for it to stack up. So your very first throw is going to be only a 10-second duration on the disc. And some people may not like that. Some people may not like the inconsistency where, the first throw is only 10 seconds, or if I forget to throw the disc out like every minute or so, it might go back down to a 10-second duration. If you don't like that inconsistency, you could put Corrupt Charge over Weeping Wounds. So if we read Corrupt Charge here, it is +3 or +30 initial combo, which lets you start at ×2. And like we said at the beginning, ×2 actually turns that 10-second duration into 22 seconds. So it's a pretty big increase in the duration. It'll also eventually, when this is stacked up, instead of being at ×5, you'll be at ×6, which will make your disc duration, instead of 60 seconds, be at that full 70 seconds. So that is something to consider there. Corrupt Charge over Weeping Wounds. I was really struggling to see what I wanted to showcase on the build today, and I just said at the end I was going to explain both of them there. So you can decide on either Weeping Wounds or Corrupt Charge. Let's continue on though with Galvanized Elementalist. This is plus 80% status damage, and on a melee kill you get 30% status chance, stacking up 4 times. So that's 120 status chance. Then we have Virulent Scourge. I'm sorry, some of the order of these mods are a little bit out of whack because of the other 2 builds here. So we have Virulent Scourge, which is the 60/60 Toxin. That's going to mix with this one here, the 60/60 Heat, and it's going to make gas. And then we have Electric at the end here, and that's going to be to activate Melee Influence, which is on a melee electricity status, 20% chance for elemental melee status effects to apply to enemies within 20 meters for 18 seconds. So that disc will also proc Melee Influence. Okay, let's go back now to Condition Overload. This is flat damage per unique status effect affecting the target. And then we have Primed Reach for +3 range, which also affects the disc. So the disc normally has a 4-meter AoE range. This turns it into a 7-meter AoE range. And again, like we were saying, Melee Influence also affects the disc. So it's actually kind of going out even farther than that. In the stance slot, we're still using Rending Crane. It doesn't really matter the stance in this case. And for the Tennokai slot, we use something a little bit special here. We use Dispatch Overdrive, where on a heavy attack hit, we get plus 60% movement speed for 15 seconds. Remember, we're using this on a Pseudo-Exalt Warframe that uses Wrathful Advance. So you're not actually hitting with this weapon. The only time this weapon comes out is when you press Wrathful Advance. And because of that, anytime you press Wrathful Advance, you get a 15-second movement speed buff, which is just really nice. To understand how the Zenistar works with Pseudo-Exalt Warframes, you have to understand how Wrathful Advance works. There are 2 ways to cast Wrathful Advance. You can either tap it, and that will force a heavy attack, or you can hold it, and that will teleport your character. Either way, you get that Wrathful Advance buff. Now, when you tap it and force a heavy attack, if you were not a Pseudo-Exalt Warframe and you were a true Exalt Warframe, like Valkyr, for instance, when you have your claws out, that heavy attack is going to use the claws to do it, or it's going to use whatever exalted weapon you have to do that Wrathful Advance heavy attack. However, if it is in a Pseudo-Exalt Warframe, like Atlas, like Gara, again, probably like a few other Warframes that I just can't think of off the top of my head, it does not pull out Atlas's fists to do that Wrathful Advance heavy attack. It doesn't pull out Gara's glass blade to do that heavy attack. It uses the melee weapon that you have on your build. And that's where the Zenistar comes in. And so the Zenistar acts as a stat stick in that case. We're not truly using the Zenistar as a melee weapon. We just have it in that slot where when we press Wrathful Advance, it heavy attacks with the Zenistar, it procs Dispatch Overdrive, it throws out the disc. The disc stays out there for 60 seconds, proccing Melee Influence and all of the other statuses you have on your weapon, and that's how it works. Now, to showcase the Zenistar and how it works, I have a Pseudo-Exalt Warframe that uses Wrathful Advance. I have Atlas here. Now, normally in Atlas, you just run around fisting enemies with your 1. The only time the Zenistar is even going to come out is when I press Wrathful Advance just to refresh it. And so I'm going to act as though I need to refresh Wrathful Advance here. It's going to press that. Shabook comes out. The disc procs. That's it. I'm not pressing any other buttons. It's just doing its thing here. We're going to look, and all of these 230 Steel Path Exoghost tags are kind of dying here. Now, again, that initial throw of the Zenistar is only gonna last for 10 seconds, but now as I'm maintaining my Wrathful Advance, it's going to go up to that 60-second duration. So, you know, from here on out, I'll have that 60-second disc there. Now, there's a lot of applications to this. You can use this, you can throw it over a Void Cascade Exilizer, could be really good. You can throw it over a defense target. You can throw it over a Disruption Pylon for some reason, or you can just throw it down a hallway that maybe enemies are spawning from. This is how you build out the melee weapon, the Zenistar. I hope you guys liked it, and if you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing for future content. So now we'll have a 5-minute gameplay portion showcasing the weapon, and when that's done, we'll come back to the Orbiter and we'll give it our final thoughts. And on the gameplay showcase, we're going to be showing it in its status build, which is that second build. Now, I do think the best way to be playing the Zenistar is as a Pseudo-Exalt Warframe that uses Wrathful Advance, but I don't want to show the gameplay with me just playing Atlas and refreshing Wrathful Advance. So because of that, we're showcasing it on the second status build. So I'll see you guys again after the gameplay. Alrighty, we're about to start this gameplay portion up here. Let's go ahead and hack the terminal and we'll get into the Zenistar. We're going to be using that second status build. We also have one external, and that's our little pet that primes for us. And the reason I do that for melee showcases is just because pretty much every melee weapon in the game, minus 1 or 2 melee types, are going to use a mod called Condition Overload. And Condition Overload, for it to actually work, you need to be priming. And so I just use my little pet to prime for me. That's it. Just consider, though, the duplicate build was slightly better at dealing with Acolytes. I shouldn't say slightly. It was actually much better against Acolytes than the status build was. It's just the status build was consistently about 20% stronger in kill per minute than the duplicate build was. Now, you're still going to be making use of the disc in a damage-oriented build like we're doing right now. It's just that you're not going to be making great use of it. You know, we're going to be Tennokai-ing so often that we're going to be replacing the disc over and over and over. So a lot of times the disc won't get huge value in a full damage build. But again, I don't think a full damage build is the real correct way to be playing the Zenistar anyway. The only little gripe that I have with the Zenistar is that its disc is sometimes really random about where it goes. Sometimes it feels like it launches 20 meters like ahead of you. Sometimes it feels like it just lands 2 feet ahead of you. I've had it go like 5 feet above my head, like floating over me. And sometimes it just won't even launch. So like there is a little bit of RNG with the disc where it's just kind of weird. It doesn't always work perfectly. That's my only gripe with the Zenistar, is that it's the disc is very RNG if it wants to work correctly or launch correctly. That could be user error too, right? Like it could be me maybe not using it correctly, maybe. I tried to test and see if it was how far the target was from me from where I casted Wrathful Advance. Like, you know, if I casted Wrathful Advance at a target 20 meters from me, does it go 20 meters past him? And it wasn't consistent, so I couldn't get an exact answer there. Then, you know, I did the opposite where I attacked an enemy 2 feet in front of me and I tried to see if it would, you know, be 2 feet past him, and it wasn't consistent there either. So I don't have an exact answer on exactly where the disc goes when you when you press your heavy attack. It seems a little bit random there. It also just might be Wrathful Advance, like, launches the disc in weird ways compared to the regular heavy. Yeah, that could also be it. All right, we got about a minute left. I mean, even built for damage, this is still pretty good, right? It's a good weapon. It works pretty well. Again, like I said, like earlier in the video, I would just argue there's a lot of melee weapons that would, you could make a general damage build better than this. Okay, so we have an Acolyte here. I want to show you how the status build looks versus the Acolyte. So a normal crit build for melee is usually just 1 hits the Acolyte, maybe 2 hits. This is not so much. It's not bad. It's just not as good as a normal crit melee build. So you see there, we killed him. We took him out pretty well. It's just not as good as a normal crit build. All right, so we're at 5 minutes here. Let's deal with the Thoraxes. It should be okay against Thoraxes because they could stack statuses a little bit farther than the Acolytes can. But again, still not as good as the crit setup. He gone? I think he's gone. Okay. So that's 5 minutes, 526 kills. Okay, let's go back to the Orbiter. Welcome back to the Orbiter, guys. So I want to give my final thoughts on the Zenistar. It's a really good weapon. It has that really powerful niche on Pseudo-Exalt Warframes that use Wrathful Advance. It is a very big niche though. And so when it comes time for you to pick this login weapon, it's, it's a big deal. There's a few 100 days in between each choice. The Azima is just such a good general secondary that I would almost always suggest picking that one up as your first. You would have to really be locked into like one of these Pseudo-Exalt Wrathful Advance frames for you to want to pick the Zenistar first, but it is really, really powerful on them though. But consider that it doesn't make them. You can still play an Atlas without the Zenistar. You can still play a Gara without the Zenistar. It's more of a win more melee weapon, where you're going to increase your kill count because you can deal with areas that you're not currently dealing with. You can leave it behind in, a tile set behind you or a spawn point behind you and deal with another spawn point. So it's more of a win more melee weapon. It doesn't necessarily complete your Atlas or Gara build. They're already completed. It just makes them slightly better. So it's not a necessity, but it's still really powerful on them. So that's my final take on the weapon. Tell me what you guys think. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have an amazing day. All right, bye.